No spoilers ahead. I'm Johnny. Welcome to my house of horrors.
The first time I watched Hereditary, I went straight outside afterwards and stood in the rain, arms all Shawshank Redemptioned, and I might have cried a little bit, because I remember thinking, finally, a contemporary horror writer that gets it. And when I say it, I mean horror. The response to the movie was pretty typical. Some people loved it, some people didn't get it, and I make that distinction intentionally because I believe if you didn't like Hereditary, it could be because you missed some of it. A year later, the delightfully rotten taste of Hereditary was still fresh in my mouth, and Ari Aster had my respect. Like every other fan of Hereditary, I was excited about his new movie, Midsommar, you know what I mean. The trailer showed mostly daylight, it had the same unique scoring Hereditary did, and most importantly, it gave nothing of the plot away beyond the obvious American fish-out-of-water scenario. So I was up for it, and then I watched it. So I let the movie fester in my head for a few days, and during that time I learned through a few reviews that apparently this movie defied the visual language of horror, that it was stuffed full of brilliant foreshadowing and symbolism, that it stretched the boundaries of horror to near breaking point. And all these observations got me actively involved with the movie because they forced me to ask myself the question, had we all seen the same fucking movie? So I watched it again, and again, and again. Here's what I got out of it.
The plot.
Ari Aster himself said Midsommar is somewhat a companion to Hereditary, which is kind of like me saying conjoined twins are somewhat related. Check this out. A family tragedy leaves a character caught in the middle of a violent pagan ritual that ultimately results in them being crowned the leader of said violent pagans. Can you guess which of the two movies I'm talking about? Of course you can't. They're conjoined. Identical. Midsommar is about a young girl named Dani who's orphaned after the tragic death of her mom, dad, and sister. Her boyfriend, Christian's a bit of a dick and probably not the kind of partner you'd want at such a difficult time, but overall he's a typical young fella. Christian's realizing that Dani may not be the girl for him, but her recent tragedy keeps them together in a bond of moral obligation. Christian's friend Pelle's invited the boys to his home village in Sweden for a once-in-a-lifetime traditional Midsommar festival, and they jump on the opportunity because they all know they'll never have the money to do it as adults. What? They're anthropology majors. Guilt-ridden, Christian invites Dani along at the last minute, and to everyone's chagrin, she accepts. Within minutes of arriving, they're given hallucinogenic mushrooms and teas, and to further disorient them, Sweden's midnight sun keeps the skies blue most of the time. So mix all the disorientation in together with Dani's fragile state and a relationship that's on the verge of snapping in half, and you have the makings of a tragic trip of titanic proportions. The bulk of the second act follows a string of supposedly traditional rituals that are outlandish and barbaric and as shocking to the uninitiated outsiders as they are to we, the audience. The stress of the environment makes Dani want the hell out of there, but Christian digs his heels in and refuses to leave with her. The rituals intensify along with Christian's selfishness, and the constant drugs keep everyone numb to the slew of red flags that are popping up every 3 minutes. One by one, members of the visiting group start mysteriously vanishing until ultimately it's only Christian and Dani left. Christian's coaxed into a mating ceremony while he's off his head, and Dani's named May Queen after she wins a dance competition, also while she's off her head. I call shallow victory on that one, Dani. I've won dozens of dance contests when I've been off my head, and I didn't need crowned, or anybody to dance with, or music. After Dani's officially crowned, she realizes she hasn't gurned in a few minutes, so she wanders over to check out what Christian's doing. And when she realizes Christian's doing somebody else, everything finally goes to shit. The movie finally wraps up with Dani, the new May Queen, condemning Christian to a fucked up, fiery death as payback for his constant dickish tendencies. And if I was Christian, stuffed inside a bear suit just for being a dick, I'd be all like, I don't know how I feel about this festival. The sex and the drug stuff, sure, but this costume smells like liver and onions. There you have it, folks, the plot of Midsommar. Hereditary's a scary one. Midsommar's the one he said wasn't a horror after everybody said it wasn't scary. Let's see if there's any actual fire in this movie.
The good bits.
Credit where credit's due. That girl can act. I made fun of the number of times Florence cried, but she did as well. She hits happy and sad and angry and surprised and afraid and ultimately relieved, all in equal measure and all through an American accent I couldn't pick a hole in. So, I bow down to her acting chops. In fact, everyone did a good job when it comes to the roles they were assigned, and that's not a common statement with these sorts of movies. The on-screen visuals were faultless. The lighting, the framing, the composition, the camera movement, the depth of field, and the color grading all conspired to create a bright, airy backdrop to layer some very dark things on top of. The special effects depicting the hallucinogenic visuals were subtle and shifty the way they would be if you'd ingested these sort of things in real life.
From what I've read, obviously.
The shite bits.
Get comfy, folks. In the words of the immortal Robert Frost, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I'm done ripping this fucking movie apart.
If one more person tries convincing me of Midsommar's masterful use of foreshadowing...
I'm not gonna actually do anything, I'm being dramatic for a video.
Foreshadowing is a device that's used to give a hint of a future event in a story, and a hint is a slight suggestion. This opening tapestry is not foreshadowing, it's a drawing of everything that happens in the movie, and it's a pretty shit one. I bet it was drawn by this guy, Mick Jagger's 13th bastard son. Another example of supposed foreshadowings when Danny's sister leaves her goodbye email. That's not foreshadowing either, that's a direct statement of a person's intentions. Let me show you intelligent foreshadowing from an early scene in Jurassic Park.
The enjoyable one?
The engineers have ensured the animals won't breed in captivity by making them all female. Dr. Jeff Goldblum, whose character's name's irrelevant because he's always just being Jeff Goldblum, coins the now famous phrase, "life finds a way," implying that an island full of females will in fact find a workaround. On arriving to the island by helicopter, Sam Neill's character finds himself with 2 female seatbelt connectors. But he figures out a workaround by tying them together.
See? That's subtle, well-thought-out foreshadowing. It places the hint of something in the back of your mind, as opposed to spray painting it across your eyes.
Now, let's talk about the Swedish pagan cult, the Harga. They look out for each other, they respect the planet, and they'll applaud you when you toss yourself over a cliff.
Now that is looking out for each other.
If you're in this cult, you accept not only that you're going to kill yourself at the absurd age of 72, but also that you're going to do it in the worst imaginable manner. The Harga's expertise in organic chemistry has had their visitors 6 flavors of high since they've arrived, and they can't come up with some sort of concoction to ease their elderly loved ones into a deep, sleepy slumber instead of splitting their face open on rocks? I've no problem with gore. In fact, if it's well done, I'm totally for it. But this Atestupia scene, like several other scenes in Midsommar, is shocking for shock's sake. And that's disappointing coming from somebody who demonstrated a solid grasp of pacing and balance in his first movie. And now the point in the video that gets me into trouble. The notion that Midsommar is a study of a girl's emotional journey towards freedom from a shitty relationship. In decent movies, the hero has something called an arc. They start out one way, the events of the story affect them directly, and they end the story transformed, usually into a better, stronger version of themselves. We, the audience, see ourselves in the character, and their transformation inspires us. It makes us believe bad situations can have good outcomes. This is the whole point of movies. But there's a catch. The hero has to actively participate in their own transformation, otherwise it's not growth. For example, in Star Wars,
The enjoyable one.
Luke Skywalker learns to trust in himself. And in The Matrix,
The enjoyable one.
Neo learns to believe he's the one. But in Midsommar, an emotionally damaged girl off her head on drugs decides her boyfriend should be burned alive at the hands of a murderous cult who've given her the ability to decide whether or not he lives. They gave her the power. She didn't earn it. In fact, they pushed it on her.
And if you try saying she earned it in the dance competition, you can F off.
She admits early on that she hangs off of him and dumps her family stuff on him. She even senses at the start of the story that he's drifting, so she can't hold it against him when he continues to drift during a stressful situation. Danny's not some strong, independent woman who rose above adversity. She tagged along to a festival that went sideways, got really high on drugs, and allowed a load of psychotic strangers to murder a guy who just wasn't that into her.
The verdict.
So, should you watch Midsommar, There's something potentially terrifying in this movie, but it never fully surfaces. And it's exactly these sorts of horror films that annoy me the most. If a movie's flat out terrible, you have a laugh at it. There's countless examples of these B-movies, and if you can learn to accept them for what they are, they're bloody entertaining. But when a movie gives you a glimpse of something sinister and then fails to deliver on its promises, it becomes far more disappointing than a movie you had no expectations with. Ari Aster said he intentionally made Midsommar confusing, and I do not believe this. Nobody ever makes a movie confusing on purpose.
Pardon me?
What did you think of the movie?
It's hard to say. It was pretty confusing, but genius at the same time. You know, like most brilliant things are quite confusing, right?
Said literally nobody in history ever. I believe the success of Hereditary went to Ari Aster's head, and he went into Midsommar believing he could do no wrong. The gore was excessive, the daylight novelty wears off immediately, and it leaves you with way too many questions. What if the drugs knocked Danny over early in the dance contest? Why did any of them stay after things got mental? How the hell did Pele brainwash everyone into coming to Sweden? What if Danny didn't even come? And I'm not even touching the 90-year thing. And as for that final payoff with Danny and the big Cheshire grin, as far as I see it, the only people who get any satisfaction from this ending would be people who have problems with things that I'm not going to get into in this video.
If you're a fan of Hereditary, just forget about Hereditary if you're going to watch Midsommar. It's a disappointing film as a standalone, but it's much worse if you bring expectations with you. Until next time. It's me, Johnny, from that thing you just watched. If you enjoyed it, go down there and smash me in the face to subscribe. And if you want to watch another thing, there's one right there. Do it!